Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We're just seeing the participants tick up. So if you hold on for another 15, 30 seconds, and then we'll kick off. Fantastic. Let's kick off. So welcome and thank you to everyone for dialing in and attending this latest webinar from the ESG VC community. Today's session is a fast and furious guide for how to measure, reduce and potentially offset your carbon emissions. We know how important your time is, so we have allotted 30 minutes to provide you with a really practical overview as to how to use this assessment and what resources are available to help as well. If that's what you expected when you dialed in, then great news, you've come to the right place. My name's Andrew Noble. I'm a partner at Power Equity. We are a seed to Series A investor across the north of the UK. And I'm delighted to be joined by James Pointner from Carbon Neutral Britain, and also my colleague, Lucy Kelly, who is Operations Manager at Power. Before we kick off, though, I do want to say a few words about ESG VC. ESG VC is a pan-European initiative, and it's now including more than 125 VCs to help our portfolio companies build better businesses across a number of dimensions. The initiative is led by Karen McCormack and Henry Phillipson at Beringia, as well as a social value portal. So huge kudos to them for setting it all up. And they're joined on the steering committee by ourselves, Atomico, Lakestar, Thales, Seedcamp, Astanor, and also the BBCA. Fundamentally, there are two aspects to our activities. The first is that we want to standardize ESG reporting for early stage businesses, effectively making it fit for purpose, an easy and helpful tool for management teams. And second of all, we want to understand which topics are most pressing to you as leaders in your respective organizations, and to provide you with the tools to address them and ultimately build better businesses. So let's jump into the discussion. Carbon emissions. Now, this was the highest ranked initiative in our pilot rollout of the ESG VC measurement framework. So we know this is an area of focus for early stage companies. And this is good news because we also know that 85% of the UK's total greenhouse gas emissions is produced by businesses. And despite it not being mandatory for all organizations to measure carbon emissions yet, the government is urging all companies to measure and seek to reduce them on a voluntary basis. So at Power Equity, we've taken this step. And I was pleasantly surprised just how straightforward it all was with the help of James and his team at Carbon Neutral Britain. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to James to provide a helpful overview of what's involved. James, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you all. And as Andrew said, I'm James, Director of Carbon Neutral Britain. And yeah, it's been a great journey working with Power Equity to get them to carbon neutral status. So what we'd like to do today is just talk you through the process of becoming carbon neutral, and first of all, as a starter, really reasons for being carbon neutral. There's a plethora of reasons to do this, but generally we find with a lot of our clients there's three really driving forces for becoming carbon neutral. First and foremost, and most obvious, is the environmental impact. So being carbon neutral specifically is taking a proactive approach to environmental action. So, you know, the first step is, of course, measuring your carbon footprint, reducing your footprint and having a net zero plan. But what we find with a lot of our clients and businesses as a whole want to go one step further, and that's what carbon neutral is, then offsetting your emissions as a business. Understanding that particularly for SMEs, you can't make changes overnight and achieve net zero. It's quite a long journey to get there, and that's what carbon neutral is. And specifically, as I said, from an environmental perspective, the next 5 years are the most important for climate change before everything is irreversible. So that's really what carbon offsetting is doing, is you're reversing your impact now before it's too late for the planet environmentally. The other two reasons we get a lot of clients that are doing this, again, quite obvious, is carbon neutral is quite a powerful statement you can make demonstrating what you're doing. Net zero plan, it can be quite complex to action and to communicate to stakeholders, whereas carbon neutral really is a bold statement that you'll be able to make. So from a marketing perspective externally, internally as well, we have a lot of companies that find being a carbon neutral business a real positive for staff. So all things being equal, if you had a choice between two companies to work for and one was carbon neutral, you'd hope you choose that organization. So it's a real positive working for a company. And third, as a lot of you might find, having a carbon emissions plan, policy, net zero strategy really is important for businesses of all sizes. As you said, Andrew, there's a lot of requirements now for businesses to have this, particularly an example in the public sector. So contracting, there's policy procurement notices to work in the public sector. So a lot of companies now are expected to have a plan in place as well. So it's what I said, one step further by being carbon neutral and really promoting that to your customers and your stakeholders. So let me just bring up my screen here. I'll just get this onto full screen so I can sort of take you through a whistle-stop tour in about 10 to 15 minutes of the process of becoming carbon neutral, and also just a little bit about ourselves. So Carbon Neutral Britain, I said we're a team of environmental consultants that specialise really in the calculating emissions of businesses, and then also procuring carbon offsets, which I'll talk about as well. So for those that are interested, I'll send this presentation through to you later on as well. I'm sure Andrew will have a link that he can send out as well. So it's got a bit about us and what we do. And as a starting point, it's really important to define when we say carbon neutral, there's different types of carbon neutrality. So you can have a carbon neutral business. That's what most people think of. And it's an assessment of what you have operational control over. So that's all of your employees, their activities, the business as a whole. And that's the most common assessment, is measuring, offsetting a business to be carbon neutral. But there's other types. You can have carbon neutral services. So we work with a lot of different banks and financial institutions. So for a mortgage, ISA or financial service can be carbon neutral in effect. You can have business units that could be carbon neutral. So an example is CitySprint and the wider DPD group. Their deliveries are carbon neutral as a unit, and they're looking to achieve carbon neutrality as a business the next year. Or finally, you can also have carbon neutral products. So again, a really important distinction, that is specifically looking at the emissions of a product itself. So that can involve multiple businesses, not just you as a business, but all the way down the supply chain, all the different components and the emissions in producing that product as well. So first of all, in terms of distinctions, that there are different types out there, but of course the most common is this business assessment for organizations. So as Andrew alluded to, relatively straightforward for PAR, there's really 3 steps to achieving carbon neutral status. First and most important is calculating your emissions. So only by measuring your carbon footprint can you make a difference. Can you reduce your footprint and have a net zero plan? So what I'll do, I'll quickly take you through what that looks like, the common standards that are used for calculating, and then specifically for carbon neutrality, that's then when you offset your carbon footprint as well. So what I'll do, I said I'll briefly go through offsetting and the corporate standards involved there. And then carbon neutral certification is really demonstrating and showing what you've done as an organization as well. And specifically Carbon Neutral Britain, we provide a lot of content, resources and literature that you can use to really promote what you've done and how you are a carbon neutral business as well. So step 1, calculating. So as you may have found, many of you looking into carbon audits and calculating your emissions, there's lots of software or calculating tools that you can use, but the main corporate standard and carbon audit that businesses would complete is known as the NIFA standard. It's quite often the case, 14064, and the GHG, so Greenhouse Gas Emissions Protocol Accounting Standard. And these are used typically on all levels. So on a national level, the UK government for our net zero targets as a country. It's used in obviously mandatory and compliance markets where large companies legally have to report. And then for SMEs, as Andrew alluded to, what you're doing is called voluntary reporting offsetting. So you're choosing to be a proactive business, calculating your emissions. But obviously, we always recommend, and this is the service that we provide, is calculating via these corporate standards to really demonstrate accurately and transparently how you're carbon neutral, which is most important of all. So when you go through these calculations, typically there'll be a carbon emissions report that's produced that will show how your emissions have been calculated. So what you'll be able to do is demonstrate to stakeholders exactly how you've got there, how you are a carbon neutral business, accurately and transparent. So that's most important of all. As I said, being carbon neutral is quite a powerful statement. So really demonstrating that by using the corporate standards that are used globally is really, really important. And then the biggest question we get asked by businesses is, what is and what isn't a business's carbon footprint? And in effect, it's everything I said you have operational control over from your staff. And these corporate standards define exactly what is and what isn't your footprint. And in effect, for a business calculation, where the line is drawn. So what is your responsibility and what you need to manage, and what is the carbon footprint of another organization. So just like with financial reporting, it's a reconciliation of a previous 12-month period. So for a lot of businesses, we would look at their previous financial year, or now we're in March, for a lot of companies, we'd be looking at 2021. What did you do? And that is your measured carbon footprint. To be carbon neutral, that would be offset, and then businesses are certified as carbon neutral for 12 months, and then it's repeated each year. So to not take up too much of your time, just to give you a really brief example of the sort of things that we'll be looking at. The scopes are, as the best explanation, categories of emissions. So there's these three areas that companies report you might be very much aware of. Scope 1, in effect, is fuels and gases that you would burn as a company. So from vehicles, equipment, machinery, you might have gas heating within your offices. So they are direct emissions released into the atmosphere from your activities. Scope 2 is energy, so quite straightforward, your electricity consumption across your sites. We also do an assessment of staff working from home, because that's quite common these days for a lot of businesses. And then Scope 3 is looking at other indirect emissions. So typically as a result of what your staff do, and quite common, overlaps with other businesses. So we'd be looking at things like waste, business travel of staff, commuting, events, hotel stays, and then deliveries is obviously quite a significant one for a lot of business. So inbound, outbound delivery of products. And again, really, really important, if you're not manufacturing the product, that's out of your scope of emissions for a business assessment. It's really when that enters the business, so the inbound and outbound delivery, that's typically measured for businesses as well. So that's the sort of thing that we would be looking at. I think Lucy later on will be talking about the experience for PAR and how they went through that process. But for small businesses up to 100 staff, it typically is a process that perhaps take a couple of weeks to go through and collate the data that's needed, working with a consultant to get to what's needed. And most important of all is then demonstrating what your emissions are. So at the end of the process, via the corporate standards, you will then have a carbon emissions report that shows what your footprint is as an exact measurement. It will demonstrate how you're carbon neutral, accurately, transparently. Again, as a policy, what you're doing if you don't have a net zero plan in place yet. And most important of all as well is to show how you can reduce your footprint. So the first step, as I said, is only by measuring your footprint can you make a difference. And then from there, you can take further steps to reduce your emissions. Another common question we get is, how big is my carbon footprint? A lot of organizations really have no idea before going through an assessment what that would look like. So as a service-based business, a general rule of thumb is the carbon footprint of an organization is about 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent per employee. So if you're a business of 100 employees, most likely, scarily accurate, it's probably about 100 tons. Likewise, 10 employees, 10 tons is quite a good rule of thumb. Obviously, it's a little bit different if you're involved directly in manufacturing of products, or if you're a logistics business and so on. But for the average service-based business, it is relatively small figure that's produced by a business each year. So that's step one of the process. As I said, there's lots of organizations out there that can support you with that, and environmental consultants. As I said, they would typically use these corporate standards. This is a service that Carbon Neutral Britain provide, as we've done for PAR. And then for carbon neutrality, as I said, the next step in the process is offsetting. So just like calculating, there are these corporate standards for offsetting. And in effect, as a top line view, what offsetting is, they are projects all around the world that prevent or absorb CO2 emissions, and how they're funded are by directly selling the reductions that they made. So technically, when you purchase 1 ton carbon offset, there's no middleman. That would go directly to the project that's generated that reduction in emissions. And then, as I said, there's a few different standards. So one of the most widely used corporate standards is called United Nations Certified Emission Reductions, where the UN are involved directly in the projects. So if there was a wind farm project in Asia or a reforestation project in the Amazon, the UN would help set up the project. They would audit and verify that project. So when it says it offsets 50,000 tons or a set figure per year, that figure is scientifically accurate. And then what the UN also do, they then help facilitate the sale of that carbon offset on various markets and registries around the world. So at this corporate level, they are a commodity. They're traded on these markets around the world, and the UN helps facilitate the sale. So through these carbon markets, these carbon credits are listed and then retired through these UN registry accounts. Other standards that are widely used as well, it's called the Verra standard and the Gold standard. And they perform the same function. So these are third parties that would audit, verify, and then facilitate the sale of these carbon offsets to businesses for their carbon offsetting. And these are global standards used by all companies around the world for their emissions. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of standards. We have a lot of banking clients that use CERs, as it aligns with a lot of UN signatories for sustainable banking and so on. So there's no right or wrong answer, but these are generally the 3 largest standards that are used. And then very quickly, in terms of projects, you can get things like renewables, wind, solar, hydro projects, typically in developing countries where renewable energy wouldn't exist. There are nature-based solutions, so tree plantings, capturing carbon, peatland projects around the world. And just to give you kind of an indicative cost of carbon offsetting, we provide for SMEs portfolios where we pool 4 or 5 projects together at set capped costs. So it ranges between sort of £6 to £10 per ton. So as an idea, if you were an organisation of 100 employees and that was your carbon footprint, was 100 tons for the year, offsetting costs would be £665. So actually quite small, and a lot smaller than companies would expect to achieve carbon neutral status as well. And then finally, most importantly, once you've offset your emissions, the final step would then be certification. So promoting what you've done as an organisation. So specifically Carbon Neutral Britain, we provide carbon neutral certification, offset certifications, so evidence for retirement of carbon offsets. A lot of organisations similar to ourselves provide licence badge use to promote what you've done as an organisation. And then specifically for our organisation, we provide a lot of content on the project. So photos, information, and in most cases, a UN standard, it's aligned with UN SDGs, they have to have secondary benefits. So not just a wind farm, that would have to have a positive impact on education, jobs, biodiversity and wildlife. So you'll really within your communications be able to demonstrate not just your emissions, but these wider benefits of the projects that you've supported around the world as well. So that's a whistle-stop tour in about 10 to 15 minutes of the process of how it all works. As I said, I can certainly pick this up, or my colleagues can pick up any further conversations with you. But that's kind of a brief introduction of the process.
Thank you very much, James. If you can come out of your screen, that would be great, and then we'll sort of hopefully beam up our faces. James, thanks very much for a great overview. And for those listening, what we'll do is we'll send round your deck afterwards so that people can read some of the detail a bit closer. And I'm sure I've posted a few links in the chat group, including your email address, James. So you may well be inundated with emails following this and lots of questions. On the subject of questions, there are a couple of coming through the Q&A already. This is great. So please, if you have anything to ask, please post them in the Q&A. And I think, James, you'll be able to pick those up and almost some type answers as we go. And certainly as I hand the reins over to Lucy as well. I mentioned, or we have mentioned, that Power Equity have been through this process, and we thought it might be helpful for you, the audience, to hear from Lucy, who led that process back in February. I'm pleased to hear it was relatively straightforward. Lucy might tell me otherwise. But Lucy, can you provide a bit more context on this for what it was like for Power going through the carbon measurement and reduction and offsetting process, please?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, James. And good morning, everybody. So just to give you a bit of context about Power as a company. So we're a very lean business. We don't have a supply chain. We don't sell any physical products. We are a services business. We have less than 20 employees. We're highly digitized. We have just one office in a city where most people walk to work, up in Edinburgh. And our carbon emissions were calculated from the period of January 21 to December 21. And that was a period where most people were in lockdown. And when we were going through our calculations, we realized that 73% of the time, the team at Power were working at home. So that was, it's quite a significant impact on our carbon emissions. It also limited company travel. So in total, we only had 11 return flights and 30 return trains taken over the last year. So I imagine that this year, our carbon footprint is going to look slightly different. But last year it was 15 tons. So almost spot on what James said. It was almost 1 ton per employee. So we're 18 employees and 15 tons. So perhaps that will tick up this year with a bit more travel. So the process was incredibly simple. I think when you see things like Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 and Scope 3, it looks quite intimidating. It looks like there's a lot of data to gather, but actually what we were sent was a four tab spreadsheet. Tab 1 was very basic company information. Then there was the tab for Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. And actually it was a very simple process. You just need to get the right people in the room to help you collate that data. So we had the finance team, our HR team and our office management team help collate data on electricity usage, water consumption, how many people worked remotely over the year, what kind of electricity we use, whether we have a boiler in the office, how many trips were taken over the year. So in total, that took around a week for us to collate that data. Obviously, that wasn't working 9 to 5 on collating that data. It was just a lot of, finding the right spreadsheets and where the right information was kept. And obviously, if you have your accounts in order, that's incredibly helpful. And then once we'd sent that data over to Carbon Neutral Britain, that then took 2 weeks to then get our calculations back. So we were delighted to see that we were only 15 tons. And along with that, we were then, given our media pack. So we decided to offset our emissions, and we've invested in projects such as a hydropower project in Chile, a wind farm project in the Philippines, a rice husk power project in Cambodia. So it was great for engagement within Power, within our employees. They want to know exactly how we've offset our emissions. Everybody, they love their job, but they want to know they're doing good in some way. So that was really great for engagement. And later down the line, we'll use that to engage with our clients. And in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, we're a very lean business. We're highly digitized. We don't have as many levers to pull in terms of how we reduce our emissions as if we had physical products or we were manufacturing. So if you are in that area of work, you'll have more levers to pull. But for us, and just to give you an idea of next steps and how we're going to continue to reduce our emissions, it's going to be an ongoing project. We're tightening up our policies such as company travel, encouraging employees that if they can do meetings online, try and do it. But if they have to travel, then try and go by train rather than plane. We can introduce things such as low flow taps to reduce our water consumption. Just to give you an idea, our Scope 3 emissions, which are things such as recycling, water consumption and travel, they accounted for 50% of our emissions. So that's where we've got more levers to pull. So hence why introducing low flow taps could benefit us. And also, encouraging employees to turn off lights, not constantly charge their laptops. So it's just really thinking very holistically about the business and how we operate day to day, how we can impact that. And I think within the ESG VC community and as within the startup community, it's a great opportunity to really learn what everybody else is doing and, you know, take hints and tips and go from there. So hopefully that was of help. And just in summary, it was a very, very quick process, 1 week from your side doing data gathering and much less intimidating than expected. And it's a great way to engage the team and get them on board with your journey to becoming carbon neutral.
Right. Thank you very much, Lucy. And hopefully that gives everyone a good steer as to what it looks like for a young business to go through that carbon measurement process. Because I think that's the scariest part for young companies, is to understand, okay, what data do I need to provide? How much time is this going to take? You know, what kind of resourcing do I need to allocate to this? And it is generally much more straightforward than many of us previously thought. We've got lots of questions coming in. James, you've probably been ferociously typing away in the background. What we'll also try and do is just do a bit of a Q&A. When we send around the deck to each of you, we'll maybe just pick up these questions and send around a Q&A as well. A couple of questions that are on my mind that have certainly come through from our portfolio companies. I mean, at what stage should young companies start thinking about this, James? Is it ever too early, or should they wait until they're a slightly bigger size?
Yeah, good question, Andrew. I think really we all have a part to play environmentally, whether you are an individual or a company with thousands of people. So from an environmental perspective, I think it's really important everyone should do their part for the planet. And if you can get on top of it early, I think that will really help focus business decisions, commercial decisions, and it'll be a real positive from day one. So there's no real early time or too early time to really start the process. And as you know, as we highlighted, as a small business, your carbon footprint will be very, very small. So the cost to achieve carbon neutrality for small businesses is very, very small and hopefully not cost prohibitive.
And another question coming in, actually a couple of questions, which is, how are you measuring energy usage at home and also water and waste at home as well? I think that's going to be quite a key question for a lot of young companies with flexible working arrangements as well, James. Yeah,
good question. So, well, there's primary and secondary data in carbon audits. So primary data would involve looking at every single employee, looking at their exact energy bill and measuring what that is and the differences between when they are at home and they aren't at home. So that is technically one method that could be used. What we typically use for businesses is industry average values. So that's what we did for PAR, for example, looking at remote working. We, you know, as Lucy mentioned with HR, we were looking at how many days employees worked from home. And then we have UK average statistics for energy usage of home workers per day. So multiplying that by the number of days staff are working at home, that's how we got that figure as well. And that's demonstrated within the report. So the importance of these standards are you can make assumptions and estimates. That's very common, very, very common for SMEs. But to be accurate and transparent, you really need to show evidence of that and how that has been achieved. So that's the importance of that report at the end, showing any assumptions or estimates like that were used.
Great, thanks. Thanks, James. I mean, we did promise a fast and furious session, and it would be half an hour because we're very much appreciative of everyone's time. As I said, we'll send around the recording, we'll send around the slides, we'll pull together a Q&A for you all so that you can get access to as much information as to how to go about this as possible. So really that's it from us. If you are interested in using the ESG VC measurement framework, please jump onto our website. It's free. And please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. And also please keep an eye out for our next event in April, which is all about responsible AI with experts from INSEAD Business School. So thank you for tuning in, and many thanks from all of us in the ESG VC community. Thanks to James and thanks to Lucy, and we hope to see you all soon. Bye for now.